Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, coming to you with a slightly different type of video tonight. So it's currently 11 o'clock and it's still well above 90 degrees outside, and it's humid as shit, and my air conditioner is cycling because it cannot keep up. So that pretty much means that not much is happening on the bench tonight. It's just too hot. I mean, my hands are literally sweating, so touching plastic is not a great idea. The intruder's getting a few nights off because it's going to be like this for a few days, so I'll probably be working on the Edward Mustang in the meantime as I can. But because it's so fucking hot, I figured instead of trying to suffer through it doing model stuff, why not have a bit more of a talking video, answer some questions, rant about some shit, things like that. So let's get to it. Okay, let's start things out with a question. Is there any chance the HK-B17 will see the bench ever again? So, if you've been following the channel, you know that I think it was, earlier in the year. God, 2020 has destroyed all concept of time, hasn't it? Earlier in the year, I was working on HK's 148th B-17G, and basically got to the point where I was putting the wings together and just ran out of fucks. The engine nacelles and the leading edge of the wings and the details on them just would not line up, and because I lacked the ability to actually manipulate the physical shapes of things, it was just not a happy join, and basically blew what fucks I had out of the water. The kit itself had basically soured itself, just kind of in the process of seeing, oh, this is what you get in the box. You get stuff that is barely better, or maybe even worse than the 40-plus-year-old monogram kit. So it's currently sitting in a box over there. I have not pulled it back out, and I do not plan to. However, funny story. A few months ago, I don't know. I got a hair up my ass about getting another one and seeing if it had the same problems on the wings that this kit did. Even went all the way through ordering the damn thing, buying one on eBay for a pretty good price, and was thinking, okay, I'll slam it together kind of in secret and do like a big reveal video of like, hey, I got a second, whatever. Then, a couple days later, I got an email from the seller that the warehouse that the kit was stored in burned down. It fucking burned down, and asking me what I wanted to do. And so I said I want a refund because the kit is now ashes, which is probably better for it. Anyway, I'm not a huge believer in signs and shit like that, but I definitely took that as a, maybe just leave that alone for a while. So I'm not going to say never. There is a chance I may decide to revisit it again at some point. I may happen to source another one that is the same sort of good price that I'm willing to spend to find out whether or not it was just this one kit or whether it's sort of a universal problem. But until that happens, it's probably not going to be seeing the bench anytime soon. However, I do have some fun, interesting things I'm considering for the future once I get the intruder off the bench and once I get this Edward Mustang done. So stay tuned and we'll see what happens. Okay, next I want to touch on one of those phrases that kind of makes my eye twitch, and that is the consistency of milk, which on Facebook, on any group, on forums, wherever, whenever somebody new comes along and asks how to paint such and such, you always hear, thin it to the consistency of milk, which, just fucking stop. First of all, what kind of milk? There's skim milk, there's 1%, 2%, whole milk, half and half, buttermilk, almond milk, oat milk, soy, there's a bunch of different milk, and all of it has different consistencies. So basically you're saying make it the consistency of a liquid, which is not fucking helpful at all. Just it's imprecise and helps really nobody. There's also the fact that different paints like to be thinned down to different ratios. I mean, I've got, here we go. This MK12 primer, very similar to Mr. Surfacer 1500, right? But it likes to be thinned probably 3 times as much as MS 1500 in order to spray about the same. Why? Fuck if I know. It's probably because it's got all kinds of crazy shit in it. Who knows? Just an example of, you can't have a universal rule for thinning things when you're dealing with all kinds of different paints. Also, I like to paint thin. I like to paint small. I have to thin my stuff way more than the consistency of milk. The consistency of milk would be way too, lacquer thinner doesn't flow like milk. Most acrylic thinners don't flow like so. It's just pretty fucking stupid. My personal recommendation for thinning paints is, depending on what you're going with. If you're going with something like MRP, it's already pre-thinned. You can pretty much spray it the way it is. If you want to thin it down, you're talking adding a couple drops. If you're talking something more like Tamiya or guns, my starting ratios are 2-to-1 thinner to paint. If you're talking Vallejo, don't put it in your airbrush. Simple as that. Other acrylics, it just kind of depends what you're trying to do with them, how you're trying to use them, what airbrush you're spraying it through. There's too many variables to take into account. But for the guns and Tamiyas and things like that of the world, basically 2-to-1 is my starting ratio. Then I will grab a little tattooing cup that I use to mix them in. I'll put some thinner in it, stir it around. And basically what I do, it's the exact same thing that wine snobs do, looking at their glasses, looking for the legs on the side of the glass. I'll look for those on the stir stick, and I'll see sort of how it's looking on here. And basically I use that consistency to where when I stir it and pull it out, if it starts draining down and I can see it like going transparent and not just being like a big smear of actual paint, but it's like you can actually see it starting to drain down, that's probably in the ballpark. If it's too thin and it all starts pooling at the bottom and it goes very thin, I've probably gone too far, unless I'm trying to do shading or some sort of very light thing for like a blend coat, then that's fine. But again, it's basically knowing how the materials perform, knowing what you like in your airbrush, and knowing the environment you're spraying in. Shit that is humid is going to take a little bit more stuff to get it through the airbrush, just because my personal theory, and I don't have the environmental sciences background to back this up, but my personal theory is that humidity makes the air a bit thicker, and so therefore it takes a little bit more oomph, or it takes a little bit thinner paint for the Venturi effect to work in the airbrush as well. Which is why if you're ever painting on a really humid day, it feels like shit is just sticking in there a little bit more, and there's just a little bit more hesitation, like the engagement point is off a little bit. I think that's what it is. But anyway, consistency of milk is bullshit, and stop it. Okay, next up is another pet peeve phrase of mine, and that is modeler versus assembler. This is something that you see thrown up all the time when kits don't go together very well, when poor engineering choices are made, when somebody is struggling with something, and then you hear, well, you must be an assembler, or, well, I'm a modeler, not an assembler, whatever. And I have been hearing this phrase literally like since the month I came back to the hobby, and to me it was just as much bullshit then as it is now. And basically for the simple fact that 99.9% of us who are active on the interwebs are building kits. What do you do with kits? You fucking assemble them. Even if it's a vac form kit, you're still, it takes more work to assemble it, but you are cutting out pieces that somebody else designed and molded and made and putting them together. That is assembly. There are those out there who scratch build entire kits and do it amazingly well, and my props to them. I do not have that sort of mental vision to see, well, if I cut out these different frames and do this and put, my mind isn't there. I don't have it for whatever whatever it is that makes that work. I don't have it. So for those people, sure, they can call themselves modelers and disparage everyone else's assemblers. For everybody else, fuck off. It's tired and stupid, and honestly, I think it's something people throw out to try to make themselves feel self-important compared to others. Is what it is. Coffee break. Now, if we kind of let go of the whole modeler versus assembler bullshit thing that exists, and think about it more as like, some people like challenging kits that don't play ball, other people really don't, and they really want kits that go together and sort of engage with them in the process and make it sort of a pleasant thing to get into paint and things like that. Those are both totally fine positions to have. I know that, as Chris Becker says, this hobby is actually many different hobbies, and I fully agree with that. Some people just like buying the kits. Some people like slapping shit together in a weekend, calling it done, whatever. Other people like, improving old kits, bashing them together. Other people are more interested in painting and weathering. It's all good. It's all fine. Whatever it is, where it galls me is where there are things that are objectively true and not true about different kits. And basically, like the rest of the world in 2020, apparently objective truths no longer exist. So you can say that, for example, I'm currently looking at the Edward P51. Their main gear bay and wing design basically invites problems. It's a lot of parts going together with really poor positive location management, and you're just asking for trouble. I mean, that's a tolerances issue where, if somebody gets something a quarter millimeter off, it's going to throw everything else off. And there's no real way to super test fit this over and over and over again to make sure you get it right, because the gear bay doesn't hold itself together. It's got like 4 pieces, and they're all kind of, some of them are thin and they flop around, and so it's it's an annoying thing. Some people love that shit. Other people, like me, I'm like, I would much rather have, that's somewhere where I would love to have just one piece I could just drop in, or something that is designed with much more positive hold. Maybe instead of kind of like the teeth that it has that just kind of sit, maybe they can be a bit more like locking teeth, where they have the little kind of crossbar on top so they can't slide once they're in place. Or just, fucking anything. Location pins and holes that are bigger than micron sized. But I mean, that's me. I prefer kits that go together extremely well. I prefer kits where I look at the engineering as I'm building it and I'm like, holy shit, that's amazing. Like, to me, is Big Corsairs. Great example. Some elements of the Intruder are a great example. Other elements, you can tell they got over their skis a little bit, or they didn't really think about the way it should go together. But yeah, to me, that whole modeler versus assembler thing is just, it's basically the same thing as like, animals walking around fluffing their feathers out and being like, ooh, look at me. Like, it's the same bullshit. And honestly, it frustrates me when it gets applied to new modelers as well. Like, well, you have to start with a cheap, shitty kit to build your skills. Building skills is important, especially if you want to deal with cheap, shitty kits, for sure. But at the same time, again, different people are in this hobby for different reasons, and some people may like the building part of it. Some people may want to get through that and get to the painting. And for those people, I'm much more a believer of getting them a kit that will get them a quick win and get them to paint in as, in as little pain as possible. So instead of buying like the old Revell Dauntless from practically World War II, something like a 1/48 Tamiya Mustang that isn't going to give you many problems on the way to paint. Like, that's to me, a much better ramp into the hobby to understand sort of the mechanics involved, figure out what you like and don't like, and then branch out from there once you have a nice finished kit sort of in your hands. So that's my take on that. So the whole thing about recommending starting with old shitty kits is a great segue into the next topic, which is the rampant nostalgia for old shit. I swear, I think this, maybe the hurricane caused it something, but I feel like this week on Facebook, on various groups, I've seen more of it than usual, of like, remember the old red tube tester cement? How great was that? That was amazing. Or like, buying Airfix kits out of bags, and just, I really don't get it. I think back to those things, and I think back to, modeling as a kid, and it's like, yeah, it was its own thing. I sucked back then. Um, I didn't have the eye for it that I do now. I didn't have the patience for it. It was fine for what it was, but I mean, hell, even when I was a kid, I hated that red tube glue because it took forever to cure and it got everywhere. And if I'd known that something like Tamiya Extra Thin existed, or shit, just even acetone, I'd have been on that in a heartbeat. There's lots of old shit from my childhood I don't long for. I don't long for, those giant CRT computer monitors that only showed green. I don't long for 5 1/4 floppy disks. I don't long for, honestly, landline phones, dial-up modems. Like, having to install something with 6 disks, being charged by the minute for your time on the internet. Like, and that was honestly more like teenage years, but still, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that, like, yeah, leave that in the past. Like, it was what it was, and the sort of like tyranny of the old that is very pervasive in this hobby is definitely a frustrating thing, and I wonder how much it kind of holds the hobby back, because when you have this whole contingent of people that just will not try anything new, and it's like, well, I'm going to build the exact same way I built when I was a kid, or I will never change from this one brand of paint. Like, I get it, you find what works and you go with that, but at the same time, it's a great way to get sort of ossified and stuck in a rut. You don't really expand your horizons, you don't encounter new things. To me, it's kind of like saying that, all music since 1998 sucks. No, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I just happen to be a teenager in the late 90s, and so that's kind of my sweet spot. But at the same time, I'm fully willing to admit there's plenty of stuff out there, even nowadays, that is great. It's just, maybe it takes me a little bit longer to get into it because it's not burned into my deep long-term memory from, intense memories of teenage years or things like that. So I think new stuff in anything, new stuff in technology, new stuff in movies and books, like new styles, new model kits, it's all the same. New foods, try it out. If you don't like it, you don't like it, but at least give it a shot before dismissing it entirely. And as one last little addendum to the whole old shit nostalgia thing, for some reason it seems that that the people that we get in SMCG that tend to wax nostalgic about, testers, tube cement, and things like that, are invariably the ones that cannot take critique. And honestly, we wonder, among the admin and moderation team, why they signed up in the first place. Like, they have any idea what they were getting into? They're the ones that often go with like the big drama queen rage quit type things. I don't know. Yeah. The thing that confuses me even more than that, though, is when people like join just to rage quit. Like, you have that little going on in your life that joining a Facebook group just to stir up shit is what you're gonna do with all your time. Good job. So something I see on a pretty regular basis is somebody saying, oh, I've got, insert great kit of your choice here, but I have to build my skills before I can attempt it. No, you don't. You don't. I realize that, everybody has different financial situations, things like that. At the same time, this hobby is one of the cheaper hobbies out there that you can enjoy. I mean, compare this to something like golf or mountain biking or hunting, whatever it might be, where equipment runs into the thousands of dollars easily in the course of a year. In the case of things like, golf and whatnot, you have greens fees to deal with. And with this, even a great kit, even the best kits in the world, are usually at most like $150, unless you're talking some sort of, weird esoteric monster like like HPH's 148th B52 or something like that. Like, there are a couple of exceptions that are just absurd and they run into like the $1,000 range, but for the most part, you're talking about a kit that you can work on for months that costs you less than taking your family to go see a movie back when we could actually go see movies. The failure cost is infinitesimally small compared to all kinds of other things out there. You know, in mountain biking, yeah, you want to build your skills before you attempt a really tough obstacle, because otherwise you're talking about going to the hospital, or maybe dying if you land wrong, or, you know, maybe brain damage if you land, like, all kinds of actual real world consequences. If you fuck up a kit, you fuck up a kit and you're out $150, which, yeah, that sucks, but compared to what? I mean, there's a lot worse out there. And think about the lessons that you gain from fucking up that kit, the stuff you know not to do next time, and then when you come back around and try it again, you've already been through it. You've already gone to that. You know, you've already gone to the school of the Tamiya Mustang or the Wingnut Wings, whatever. And yeah, so there's no reason to fear great kits. It's better to dive in and just go slow, take your time, be patient, take your lumps, and grow as a modeler. Okay, so P-51s, what the fuck? Um, why is there such a fascination with Mustangs? Well, honestly, every major fighter of World War II has something of a cult of personality around it. I mean, shit, the BF-109. I mean, come on. Spitfire, Zero, Corsair, Mustang, Thunderbolt. Even though it's rare here in the West, things like the Yak-3 and the LA-5 they sure should have their share of followers too. I think in the Mustang's case, it's one of those where, for modelers, for a long time, there really hasn't been much movement on them. You know, back when I came back to the hobby in 2010, the latest and greatest kit was the Tamiya P-51, which was at the time 15 years old. It's now 25 years old. And so just there wasn't necessarily all that much action out there. And then in 2015, of course, Tamiya dropped their 132nd Mustang, which finally gave the 132nd crowd something worth building. And I think it started ramping up from there, and then Edward follows up, or Airfix follows up, Ming follows up, Edward follows up, and so now we have sort of a renaissance of great Mustang kits, or at least new Mustang kits, in 148th too, so there's just a lot more variety out there. And I think it's kind of like the resurgence of Shermans in 135th, where for a while it was, you know, Dragon, Tamiya were kind of the games in town, then Tasca / Asuka came along, and then in the last little bit here we've had Ming and RFM and all these others jumping into the Sherman pile. Same kind of idea, right? You have pretty cool new kits that inspires interest and people want to build those things. As far as the Mustang as an aircraft, I think it's really, honestly, it's just a great story. I mean, for those who aren't aware, the Mustang got its start basically as a desperate deal for North American to not license build Curtiss P-40s. The Brits wanted P-40s, and North American basically convinced them they could design a whole new aircraft and have it ready to go faster, and it would be a better plane and cheap and all this. You know, it sounded like an advertising new business pitch. Honestly, there's persistent myths that the original design for the Mustang was sketched out on a cocktail napkin. I believe that's sort of a bit of an urban legend, but at the same time, maybe some very initial swipings, perhaps. But still, the thing was developed from initial like, okay, let's give it a shot, to first flight in like less than 3 months. And even with the Allison engine that it had in the P-51A and the A-36 and things like that, while it was limited as a high altitude fighter just by the nature of the engine, it was still a pretty damn effective low level fighter and ground attack aircraft. And I mean, the A-36 was used throughout the war. I mean, even in 1945, it was flying around in the CBI theater, blowing shit up. So interesting. Plus, you've got all the laminar flow wing stuff, which is also its own kind of interesting story. Like this, the first time, instead of just kind of like, hey, let's design stuff, it was, hey, let's apply scientific principles to inform the design from the out. Like, definite progression of aeronautical engineering from that perspective. Then you get the fun thing of the Brits basically playing the role of Texans and saying, what if we put a larger engine in it? Just fuck it, why not? And so they put the Merlin in it, and that transformed it as an aircraft. Similar story played out in the Soviet Union with the Lag-3 becoming the LA-5. Basically the same thing, except instead of going from inline to inline, they went from inline to radial. But it's the same thing of the engine transforming an aircraft into something that becomes a war winner. Curiously enough, when they put the Merlin in the P-40, that didn't happen. So definitely it's a mind meld of engine and design and everything, making this great aircraft. On top of that, even though everyone always bitches that Allied things are boring and all the the Germans have all the color schemes and their colorful, cool camo, fuck that. That's another rant. But really, Mustangs have, from the different fighter groups and squadrons, have all kinds of crazy nose art. They have all kinds of crazy, rudder bands and nose colors, and you got invasion stripes. You've got shit that was camouflaged, and you've got shit that was bare metal, and then oh shit, we need to make a camouflage, so you have stuff painted over the bare metal, which is then shipping off like crazy. All kinds of stuff happening, and so it's very easy to find a very distinctive, unique looking Mustang and just go with that. And I think that and the P-47, the reason they're both so popular in terms of Allied aircraft is because they've got a nice storied history, they were heavily used, and it's easy to find really interesting examples. So I think that's pretty much what's driving the Mustang, that and the fact that they're new kids. Okay, so I think that about wraps it up. And I've got to say, this whole talk rant fest thing was honestly a lot more fun than I thought it would be. To the guy in the comments from whatever was it, last week maybe, who was saying that all I do is bitch about stuff. Well, honestly, sometimes bitching about stuff is fun. So there you go. And thanks for following along. I honestly don't know what this is going to look like when I take the card out and shove it in the computer. It may be like 2 hours long, so I may pull some clips out and sort of put them out over the next week or so. But hopefully I can fit everything into a nice, relatively compact little nugget of content for everybody to enjoy. So thanks for watching, and further questions, requests, etc., send them my way, and we may do another one of these here in the next couple days, because the heat's not going anywhere for at least a week. Later.